A very warm welcome to the start of the week and this PPMA's Lunch and Learn series. And we've got a brilliant lineup throughout July, and I can't think of a better way to kick this off by having in conversations kind of one of our new experiences here, the brilliant Rob Moss, editor of Personnel Today, and he's going to be put in the hot seat, kind of. I mean, that's the idea, by Karen Gray, President of PPMA. I can never say that, and I've said it so many times, and it still doesn't kind of just trip off the tongue. PPMA. I can see loads of fantastic friends and colleagues who've joined us today, and also some new faces, which is always great. And that's all I'm going to say to you today. I'll see you at the end of the program just to kind of wrap up. But a huge thanks to Rob and Karen for joining us this Monday. And I can't wait to see what little intrigues and stories Rob's going to share with us. So over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lethem. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you joining today, and Rob, it's great to see you too. Obviously this is the time of year when we are corresponding with each other for the Personnel Today Awards judging, and it's a very, very different set of experiences this year. I'm really interested to hear from you about your thoughts around remote working. It's obviously one of the top hotspot buttons at the moment, so just keen to get your insights on what you've been hearing from people since lockdown started.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Lethem. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, working from home, I guess it's a very, very interesting topic, and I think we're at a stage currently, or we have been for the last 3 or 4 months, where we can see such a huge shift in what's going to happen, and I'm finding it very interesting whether that will be the case or whether we'll kind of drift back to where we used to be. But certainly, I mean, on a personal basis, I've worked from home 2 days a week for years, 10 years or so. Yeah. So I'm very used to it. I haven't been as used to it as having my family around at the same time, sharing the kitchen table, sharing the broadband with children who like to use the Xbox. So it's been very interesting. But I've found the way that I miss the office to a degree has been very different, because no one's there. Everybody else is working from home. So lots of very interesting things. But I think we've already started to see some fairly major announcements. I think it was Barclays, Deloitte, some other large organisations that have mentioned that they're not going to open such and such office. John Lewis announced last week that they're going to close one of their head offices in London. And so I'm just really intrigued to find, and understand how this might affect the workplace. And I've got a few ideas.
So Rob, just because I want to get you to share those ideas, but I'm just kind of interested to, because like you, I work from home relatively frequently, but even for me, it's actually been a really different experience with the rise of Zoom and Teams and Skype and WebEx, and God knows if anybody else invents another bloody meeting app, I don't know what I'll do. I think I'll run away back to an office somewhere. But has this sort of extended period working remotely, has that changed your experience of your work, do you think, in ways that you might not have expected?
It has. I think part of it is, I mean, Zoom hasn't been around for that long, but it has been around for a while, and obviously Skype's been around for a very long time. The idea of video calls has never really interested me. I've been involved in a few before, but until lockdown, I wasn't at all. So, I find them very, very useful, and in a way that is almost more useful than being in the office with people who might be in a meeting or might be on the phone or might be knee deep in a project and you don't want to interrupt them. I mean, there are pluses and minuses. I think the Zoom call has typically, we ran a nice piece a few weeks ago called it was an opinion piece. Apologies, I forget who it was by, but it was called "Please Don't Zoom Me Because You're Bored." That has been one of the things that has been going on for people who are working from home. Yeah, they don't get that sort of contact with people while they're making a cup of tea. And it's all about balances, isn't it, really? I think that, I think there is an argument to say I will call someone if I'm a bit bored, because you want to recreate some of those moments. But also, yeah, absolutely. None of us want to be in endless Zoom meetings that could be dealt with on email. Yeah, I think that's one of the main things is I think we've all started to learn now is when's a good time for a phone call, when's a good time for a Zoom meeting, when's a good time for instant messaging. Yeah, I think we've all come up a learning curve so quickly, and I think actually I might be wrong, but particularly British people or people working in the UK, should I say, have always been a little bit shy of the idea of video calls, and I think we've kind of got over that hump now, and it's interesting.
It is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I sort of smiling to myself about Zooming when you're bored. We released one of our podcast series on Friday, and that was looking at leadership. And one of our interviewees was Piali Dasgupta, and she did actually say, "Do you know what? It's still okay to use email." I thought, yeah, actually, that's really amazing. And I don't know. I mean, not everybody will worry about this, but I've spent more time putting on makeup and brushing my hair because I've got wretched Zoom calls than I would ordinarily do. It's just the human experience through technology is fascinating, isn't it? Because I suppose one of the things it's made me reflect on is, as you say, it's this notion of work is a gathering place, isn't it? For all of us, and just those little social interactions, maybe talking around the kettle or whatever it is. I think people have really missed that much more than they anticipated that they might have done. Is that a theme that you're finding as well when you're talking to people?
I think so. I mean, for our office, the Personnel Today office, there's on a day when everybody's in, there might be sort of 15 or 20 people who work on Personnel Today and some of the related products. So we do have those moments where there's a lot of banter. We start talking about television or football or whatever it might be. And those moments of you kind of lose those a bit. But I think then you've got other positives, such as not commuting as much. Or at all. The work-life balance with my home life and my family, and obviously as lockdown eases, we will see. It'll be interesting to see where we are in a balance. But I think for HR, I think it's a very interesting area because I think yes, we can all kind of assume that yes, productivity hasn't been affected because of the lockdown. It probably has in some ways, but it's very difficult for us to measure that. And I think there will be studies that will be published in due course that show that actually, it is more productive in this way, it's less productive in this way, and so on. So that's all interesting learning to take on. I think a bit like the video call and the video call's ability to be something that people want to do, I think we're in a similar point now for working from home. And obviously, people would never dream of having a new recruit working from home, but they've had to do that. And suddenly they start to realize, oh, well, actually, it's not that bad, So I think it can be quite a positive thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's things that happened that have just, I never would have dreamt in a million years. So one of our Southeast members has recruited a lawyer. He's actually going to be working from Newcastle upon Tyne. And because they don't need to be in the office. But actually, when it came up on a Shires call. I thought, God almighty, in like 20 years, Rob, you never ever would have thought that those that we would have seen the leaps that we're experiencing in some parts. I was really interested to hear what you were saying there about about understanding, you know, through research how this thing is evolving, because there's always a rush to judgment, isn't there? And I think human nature inevitably does that, because it's a, you know, really, really strange times, and we want to kind of get a grip on things. Or at least control, put some sort of narrative around that we can give comfort to for our people. You mentioned earlier that you had some ideas about the workplace of the future. What were some of the things that you've been thinking through?
Well, I think that well, first start, you've got we're facing an economic time unlike ever before. It might be very different to the financial crash of 2007-8. But it's going to be big, whatever it is. So unemployment, the desire for organisations to save money is going to be huge. So as well as the initial 3 months, 4 months or so that we've had so far, I know that it's already going on. They're going to want to save money on buildings. Now, as they do that, and some people in the property industry are saying, "Oh no, absolutely not. No, we're going to be fine." But I think the reality is that there will be a change, and I think that the way, just like we've seen offices move to open plan, to more places with bean bags and those types of things, and table tennis tables, I think we're going to continue to see a change of how office space, particularly in central London, but also any of the big cities, because you can. If you need office space, why do you need to be in London? Why do you need to be somewhere very central?
Yeah.
When we found different ways of working, but also that office space, the sort of flexibility. So the idea of signing a 2-year lease on an office is going to be, very different actually. And some of the modern, WeWork spaces, those types of outfits are obviously going to be able to say, well, actually, we can give you that flexibility. We can give you a month where you want 30 people in, and the other days you don't have, you might have 5 in or something like that. So I think that's how we will see things change. So in some ways that's quite positive. I find that quite exciting. Maybe just because I'm a journalist and I write about things, and any form of change is exciting. But I think also it brings with it some possible problems. You might have productivity problems. We've talked about working from home, and obviously you've got health and safety issues and DSE checks to do, those types of things. And they're kind of things that everyone sort of said, okay, well, it's only temporary. But actually, if people are doing this for a long time, it becomes much more of an issue. And having all the right equipment is more of an issue. So I think there's also questions about diversity. My initial reaction is, oh, this is a really good thing. People who have more complicated lives with caring for children or loved ones, trying to fit work in, they can do that much better. But at the same time, if there's also a group of people who are moving back to the office, I think HR needs to understand that they might have in future these different cohorts employees, and like many people have said, no one's had the same experience of this. Everybody's situation is fairly unique. So you've got the people who will be 100% home working, people who are 100% office, and everywhere in between for a multitude of different reasons. And I think HR is going to have to get its head around how they manage that to make sure that things are fair and that policies reflect that changing world.
I like the way, it's interesting that term you used about cohorts has just sparked something, because we get into the habit actually, and it's not just HR and AD, everybody segments things, don't they? So that we can try to understand things in a way that's relatively straightforward. And I agree with you, everybody's circumstances are very different. So for a lot of people, particularly in public sector, if you've got caring responsibilities and you can be more flexible about when in the day you work, then actually that's great, because you can be even more productive than you would ordinarily be if you're bounded by 9 to 6 or 10 to 7, whatever it is. But obviously we've then got circumstances where, actually for some people being at home is not safe. So, we're potentially talking about people in abusive relationships. We're talking about people who get very, very lonely, that people who already have mental health problems, people with disabilities who, and there's huge risks around whether we think actually we're isolating more people. But I do like that term you used about cohorts, because I think it will encourage us to think very differently about this. Got a question for you on the estate side of things. So I was talking to somebody in government the other day in civil service, and actually COVID-19 has accelerated their relocation and estate strategy by around 6 years, which, just even in and of itself blows your mind. But there's a really interesting difference, I think, between public sector and private sector, and I'm interested to see whether you agree. So obviously local councils in particular get revenue in through business rates and so on and so forth. And obviously, through regeneration policies, we want the revenue to come in from businesses. So we need office space that is filled, and we need, really vibrant high streets and what have you. Are you seeing a difference when you talk to people between the approach that you think the public sector will need to take versus the private sector?
I think I am. I think I mean the point about business rates and so on around offices and local governments' income, which is already challenged by changes in the retail market and the hospitality market, and now actually you're potentially seeing less office space than normal being used. And really, I mean, I guess some of that is a sort of macroeconomic question. Central government is going to say, well, actually, forget the way that we tax. We're going to have to change it because it doesn't reflect the way that society is working. But in terms of differences between public sector and private sector, I think it's difficult, because it's difficult really for me to know the ins and outs. I do talk to a lot of different organisations. Certainly, when we look at the key worker side, obviously there's more key workers in the public sector. I would imagine you'd include key workers who work for privatised utilities and supermarkets and so on. But when you talk about key workers, you tend to think about the public sector. And obviously, we've had all that fantastic recognition for NHS in particular, but also others. And the government's saying that austerity is not on the cards, but we will wait and see. Maybe they'll call it something different, but it might still be what people might think of as austerity. So we're facing a very difficult time, actually, and we were before anyway. And obviously, I think COVID has just highlighted some of these things. And the way that society has dealt and the government has dealt with infections and so on, I think there's a really interesting thing to look at around the use of agency workers. Some of the stuff in Matthew Taylor's report around the Good Work Plan, I think COVID has just highlighted how important some of those changes are, whether it's people working as agency workers in care homes. So the ONS put some data out last week that connected. There was a correlation of the more agency workers that are care home users, the more infection, the more deaths they were having. And the countless examples of where you can see COVID has actually shone a light on some of the bad practices that we see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I mean, I think crisis always, it shines the light on the good, the bad and the ugly, doesn't it? And I think certainly what COVID has done is it's shone the light on the structural inequities that we've been talking about for a long time. And I think sometimes the challenge with these things is about how do you, what's the lever that you can deploy that lets you deliver the most effective and most sustained amount of positive change without throwing everything up in the air. And that's the difficult thing to do. I mean, I read that report as well on the use of agency workers in care homes. I mean, obviously, there's the issue about whether older people were allowed back into care homes knowingly, suffering, being COVID positive. And I think, the CQC are looking into lots of those things, and we'll find some really interesting things coming out. But certainly there's been up in Lancashire, actually, the county council up there, they have a lot of care homes, and what they did, which I thought was really smart, was they extended the contracts for their agency workers so that they could actually stop cross-infection. And the question that raised, and I'd be interested to get your view on it, is obviously, we've pushed actually the use of agency workers to an extent that nobody is comfortable with. So I'm keen to get your view on whether you think there'll be changes to the contingent workforce moving forwards, whether people will move back to longer contract periods or more permanent employment. What do you think?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think, the other example that I could have given around key workers is, some of the people who might work for Uber Eats and Deliveroo and stuff like that, who, again, and the I think it's the word precariousness of their employment is quite similar, and that's private sector and public sector. I don't know. There's always the argument to say that the gig workers in some ways brings some benefit, and I think and the CIPD has mentioned this before as well, about not all gig workers are in precarious employment. Journalists, for example, is a good example of where there's a lot of freelance resource, and that's resource that we use. And I think that the contingent workforce does need to be better managed, and I think some of the plans from the Taylor report have those in line. I guess some of that stuff's taking a bit of a backseat at the moment while COVID is looked at. There was the case a few weeks ago. It was the IWGB took the government to court around how they had handled sick pay and so on, and basically the backup with COVID for people who were driving Ubers and so on. And I think, and they lost that case as far as I understand. So there are still questions there, but when you look to employment law, it's very strict. It's like, well, you don't have a contract, you don't. And so I think the development from the political parties to try to improve the notion of the employee, the worker, the contractor, and all the complications of the employment law status, the tax status. I think there's got to be things done to try to simplify that.
I agree. I really strongly support that one, and I think there's an irony, isn't it, that we do have this difference between employment law versus actually what goes on the ground, and public policy is not always in the same place as employment law is. And I'd love to see work being done to close that gap, because I think if we do close the gap, we are going to give people more security. And I think one of the things that COVID has exposed is how fragile work and home life is for an awful lot of people. I think that's been fascinating, hasn't it?
It has, we haven't touched upon schooling and some of the issues that people have had, but which hopefully, once schools are back, some of those difficulties won't be there so much anymore. But I think what COVID has presented us is, if we go back to those days in March, it was kind of a blank piece of paper, one that we didn't have much choice about what to do. We were forced to work from home. Organisations had to do that. That was, the guidance. But now, as we start to emerge from that, and we've discovered some positives from it, and some negatives, you know, now is an opportunity to make sure that we start to fill in that blank piece of paper with things that can hopefully improve working lives for everybody. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Rob, I just wanted to chip in because Sarah has just posted a question. I'm keen to get your view on this, is whether you've seen or heard about remote working exerting any particular influence on our younger workforce. Do you think they're more able to cope with it or less able to cope with it, do you think?
Well, I mean, this is something that I'm interested in. You know, I've worked in the same team with a lot of the same people for years. So the idea of us transitioning to working from home, working remotely, Zoom calls and so on, it hasn't been that hard.
Yeah.
I think if you're in a transient team, you know, maybe, but that would typically be younger individuals whose careers aren't, you know, a bit more bedded in. I think that offers different problems. I think on the one hand, you know, they'll be quicker with technology and you know, all the advantages that they can bring, typically to the technology side of things. But I think the notion of work and embarking on a career now, you know, call centers, for example, whether they're in the public sector or you know, the huge sort of, you know, call centers that might deal for insurance and phone companies and such, you know, they often have quite a high turnover of staff, and the idea of starting a job at home, doing, you know, it's all possible. And obviously, as things improve and the lockdown eases, then you can have more leeway between the two. And I think that's the key thing for us to explore, is bringing out the positives of home working, and, you know, trying to keep the negatives of what we've had in the past and trying just to optimize that balance between everything. But yeah, I think there's plenty to take advantage of.
Leatham, the fact that your beautiful face appeared, are you going to try and tell us that we've only got 2 minutes? Oh my God, we've only got 1 minute to go. Rob, well,
running out.
Yeah, I think, Rob, can we do this again? Because it sort of feels that there's a number of emerging themes that are coming out. Because I wanted to talk to you about productivity and engagement, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. So would you be up for another conversation to carry on?
Yes, absolutely. And maybe I'll get one of you guys onto a Personnel Today webinar at some point.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, I mean, Leatham and I particularly are busy doing all of the judging at the moment. So there's some fantastic entrants this year, which is brilliant. So half an hour doesn't go a long way, Leatham, does it?
No, but it keeps us all focused and on our toes and wanting more, and that's the whole thing. Alison Williams, thank you for your question and observation that's come in, and I'll get Karen and Rob to give some feedback on that one. It's great to have people posting questions.
Yeah.
And huge thanks, Rob,
as well.
for your time. And as I said, leaving people wanting more is always a great thing, so we will have you back for a further conversation. And Karen, also giving your time for us today. It's great to have you here. And lots of you out there doing brilliant work on behalf of the HR and OD profession. A huge thanks on behalf of us all. You know, this is a great time to actually demonstrate the power and impact that HR can bring to business, helping respond and transform. And, you know, often you are the unsung heroes, but from our hearts, a huge thanks to everyone. And if you can, join us on Wednesday when we're going to be welcoming Oracle and KPMG, and they're going to be looking at, you know, how you can prepare that kind of concept of HR strategy, segmenting the workforce, and what has the lockdown kind of demonstrated to us in terms of the need for HR to be flexible in its policy and strategy response. So there'll be a fascinating conversation and sharing of their insight on Wednesday. And on Friday, we'll also be joined by Penna, who'll be looking again more around the issues of onboarding and the recruitment challenges, which the whole process of lockdown has posed for you out there. So thanks for joining us. Once again, thanks for our guest, Rob, for joining us today. Huge thanks to Karen. Grace, who's behind the scenes making all of these things happen for us, and to your good selves out there. See you at a future program. Thank you, everybody.